Hi! This time I wanted to talk about how you can run a module that you have already played that has its secrets exposed or spoiled. This is a sort of conclusion to my series of videos featuring the Golden Sky Stories role-playing game. Some of you may remember that like a couple of months ago, or perhaps not so long ago, perhaps a month and a half, I finished this video series that would serve as a tutorial teaching you how to run a module that you have already, maybe you have played it with your players. Maybe you just read through the entire module, planning ahead, thinking of when you were going to run it with your group, but you wanted to play the module as a solo experience. So those videos, I'm going to put the playlist in the description below. They serve as a sort of playthrough tutorial, teaching you how you can handle that situation. So in this case, this video is going to go a bit deeper when it comes to the details concerning that. I will attempt to give you some advice or guidelines on how you can take a module that you, like I said, you have already played or that you have already read, so that it still feels fresh, surprising, entertaining when you play it as a solo experience. So let's begin. The first important consideration is that you should come to terms with the idea that the plot lines within the story of that module, they are going to be changed drastically because of the results. Either the results of your skill checks with a particular oracle or table that you are using as a solo experience, or maybe it has to do with the results of a game master emulator. It could be anything. But because you want to experience that like freshness when playing that module, still experimenting or rather feeling those surprises, that's why you need to change a lot of things. That's what makes it somewhat impossible to run a module, a pre-generated module as it is, when you have already seen all of the surprises, the secrets, the plot twists. They are just going to be too predictable. You won't feel as excited when you are going through an encounter and you already know what that encounter is all about, the interactions with the non-player characters, the agendas, the tactics and strategies used by the enemies. You already know that that enemy is carrying this scroll or this spell, or in the case of a sci-fi game, this artifact or this sort of high-tech weapon. So the experience is ruined like that. You can play it, but it's quite dull. I think that when it comes to running one of those modules, those spoiled modules, it's easier when the module is based on events and it's character driven. In the case of the Golden Sky Stories situation, you have your adventure site, that is the Fox's Shrine, and the forest surrounding the shrine. Those are the only two sites or adventure sites or part of this scenario, but they don't have anything special to them. The forest is just a forest. The shrine, you have a few divided sections. You have this area where there is the bell of the shrine. You have the shrine proper with those wooden doors. But outside of that, there aren't any traps or curses or anything like that. So you need to decide, in the case of a character-driven module or perhaps event-driven module, you need to decide if you want to modify that, the scenario itself, the location, the site. In the case of Golden Sky Stories, because it's quite driven by the actions and the words, the thoughts and feelings of the player characters, it doesn't matter too much in that case. When I ran that solo session or series of videos, I handled the site just as it is, presented the shrine and the forest, and didn't add anything to it. But if you prefer, you could use your tables, your oracles, to make some random rolls or drawing cards depending on the system that you are using to see if there is something else within that shrine, that forest. It could add some element of randomization to that so that it doesn't feel too dull if you prefer it like that. Now, moving on to the social encounters, you saw how the scenario dramatically changed. And just a warning, this video is going to contain spoilers for the At the Fox's Shrine scenario of the Golden Sky Stories core rulebook. The rulebook normally proceeds with the henge, the fairy-like characters encountering this other henge, Susune Hachiman. She feels quite lonely. Everything that she does is basically a way to stall the player characters from leaving the shrine. She wants them to remain a bit longer because she has no friends. So all of her, the magic that she uses to cause rain and her dialogues, they are all centered or focused on having the characters stay a bit longer, so that she enjoys their company. But I was already aware of that because I ran the adventure with my group. So I needed to randomize that so that it felt a bit exciting, or there was that element of surprise when I ran it as a solo experience. So I made those random rolls using the Solo Adventuring Toolkit. The Solo Adventuring Toolkit contains a condensed version of the Flex AI guidebook. The Flex AI guidebook is much better because it's more complete in the sort of social responses. I'm going to put a few links in the description that will give you some solo resources, so you can check out those playlists, those videos, and see the many tools that you can use. Although, when I have the chance, I want to come up or create a video where I talk about the different artificial intelligence systems that you can use to emulate player characters and non-player characters and their reactions, so that you have this artificial intelligence system going on. But like I said, in my case, during that adventure, I randomized the reactions and actions of Susune Hachiman, of the other members of the party. I think that's going to be a lot of fun if you enjoy the social interaction in a party of adventurers. It's a good idea to simulate, to create that AI sort of response. You have those characters, those members of your party, doing their own thing when it comes to fighting, when it comes to talking, reacting. They are doing their own thing based on the results of the artificial intelligence system that you are using. So thanks to that, it was very easy to run that module, even though it has been spoiled. All of the surprises are known to me. Because of the random rolls, the situation was surprising and many things changed about it. So I mentioned how Susune Hachiman felt quite lonely and she wanted friends, but in the way that things developed when I made those random rolls, the plot changed completely. Now Susune Hachiman was focused on being this sort of crusader, cleaning up the dirty places in the world, that is, removing dirt and debris and trash, cleaning up different places. So I didn't expect that at all. And it felt really nice to see that you could take a module and still play it as a completely different adventure. Now you could be thinking, but what about site-based scenarios or adventures? The typical dungeon crawls, Dungeons and Dragons, Dungeon Crawl Classics, Labyrinth Lord, any sort of those D20-based games, retro clones, pseudo clones, or even something, for example, you are running Savage Worlds or GURPS or Shadow of the Demon Lord, anything. A lot of those adventures have to do with a site that has all sorts of dangers, enemies, traps, curses, puzzles. Then you really need to cut up, chop up, or divide the different sections of that scenario. And like I said, don't feel too attached to the different plot lines of the story. they will have to be sacrificed so that something else is born, something different and exciting. Let me give you an example. Maybe you are running the first adventure in the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons introductory box set. It was the thing with the Ogre Bone Gnasher. I don't remember the name of the adventure module, it was a long time ago. But you are basically looking for the Orb of Dragonkind, which is supposed to be hidden somewhere in this ruined castle type of area. And the Ogre Bone Gnasher, he's also looking for the orb. He wants to transform into a dragon. You could make some rolls throughout the entire scenario. First of all, I would recommend that you cut up the encounters, or if you want even more surprises, cut up different sections of the encounters. So maybe you have this room, and there are different like pits or holes full of debris and all sorts of dangerous things. If you fall on them, maybe something happens to you. And you have this pair of knolls. Now I'm trying to remember the exact details of the first encounter, the first section of the adventure site. But you have, if I remember correctly, 2 knolls, and you have this area with trash and holes. If you're not careful, you can slip and fall, or trip and fall into one of those trash-filled holes. And you have those 2 knolls to contend with. But maybe you are thinking, I want even more variety. So perhaps you not only take that encounter, you also separate the knolls, and you want to generate the enemies randomly. And maybe there are no holes filled with trash, debris, pointy objects that could hurt you. Perhaps you want to take that as a separate trap, and you want to create your own table of traps. So now when the characters enter that first section of the adventure site, you're going to be rolling for the shape of the room, for the traps or hazards if there are any. You could also make a roll to see if there are traps or hazards. You're going to be rolling to determine the enemies within that room. So unlike a typical adventure module in which, or a campaign, one of those that you purchase or that you have pre-generated, generated yourself or somebody else created, in those cases they are used more like as a sort of support or auxiliary elements when you are running the adventure. Most of you, if not all of you, know that when you purchase an adventure module or a campaign, things are not going to proceed exactly as they are laid out, because unless you have a very passive group, player characters are going to be attempting all sorts of things. Things will be taken off rails. So the plot lines, the hooks, the adventure seats, they are just there to serve as a sort of support or guideline. It makes the job of running the game a bit easier. You don't need to improvise everything. There are some people that are really good at improvisation, but in my opinion, after playing many role-playing games, there are very few game masters that can actually successfully improvise an adventure. Most of them run one-shot adventures, no campaigns, and most of those improvised adventures, they are, at best, they are good. Just that they are good in my opinion. But most of the time they feel a bit lackluster because the person sometimes is not skilled enough when it comes to improvisation. So it's crucial to understand this. When you use an adventure module, a pre-generated module, you have all of those different situations, plot twists, surprises that can support the way that you are running the adventure. If the rug is pulled from under your feet, you only need to take a look or remember or take a look at the notes that you made according to the information in the module, and you will be able to handle any sort of situation immediately and with good structure and flow. But when it comes to a solo experience, a pre-generated module is basically just a set of loose guidelines. You're going to take many useful elements from that, but they are going to be modified. So again, if you are running an adventure site based module, chop it up, cut it up into little pieces, different rooms, enemies, hazards, corridors, bloodlines, etc., and create your random tables. You could do this while you are running the adventure without preparation, that is, but it's going to interrupt the flow of the game. If you're fine with that, okay. But if you want things to be a bit more smooth, constantly flowing, then you may want to prepare things beforehand, create those random tables, taking elements from the adventure module. Excuse me. I think that it's also important to pay close attention to the connections between rooms, the corridors in the case of a dungeon or a castle or a mansion, etc. If it's a wilderness adventure, those paths, those trails that connect perhaps a clearing with a pond, with some abandoned ruins, you need to pay attention to those, because sometimes the adventure modules have things like, if a player character decides to move through this hallway, that player character is going to listen to the sounds of pain and moaning and laments and perhaps screaming and yells. And that's because a connecting room has perhaps a torture chamber, or maybe there are slaves or something. But because you are handling things randomly to create that ambience or environment of surprises, sometimes room A is not going to connect with rooms B. It's going to connect with room C or D. And those rooms, they do not feature a torture chamber or, like I said, slaves. So it doesn't make too much sense that you are walking from one room to the other and in the hallway or in the path you hear these sounds of someone in pain. And so I would recommend that you also randomize the events or features of the different hallways and the connecting areas, the paths, the trails. Maybe you want to create a table after you determine if there are sounds, weird sounds in that corridor by using your oracles or tables of preference. Maybe you need to make a roll to see if the sounds have to do with someone laughing instead, or maybe you hear some sort of strange language that you cannot identify. Maybe you need to make a roll to see if you figure out more or less what they are saying. Maybe there are sounds of growling. And then when you move on to the other room, depending on what you find there, you can make some sense of the sounds. Maybe it resulted in laughter, but when you enter the next room, when you make your rolls, it's actually an empty room. There's just like a chair and a small table, and that's it. So you're going to be thinking, why did I hear those sounds of laughter? Perhaps the room is haunted. Or maybe there are echoes of the past sounds trapped in the stones of the room. Perhaps there is a secret passageway and someone was laughing, perhaps a group of bandits or whatever, and they enter this secret room, and so it looks as if they disappeared, but they are actually moving through a secret tunnel connected to the room. Or maybe someone was just there in the room and when you arrived when that person was exiting the room. And so, like I said, you can use those elements to randomize and provide surprises in an otherwise predictable, pre-generated or spoiled module. I also think that sometimes you will have to adjust the agendas and the purpose, the objectives of different non-player characters. Perhaps the module features a non-player character that is supposed to be the villain, and another non-player character that is supposed to be your ally or friend. But depending on the results of your solo random rolls, depending on the oracles, the Game Master emulator that you are using, perhaps your own skill checks or whatever, it makes more sense than that this non-player character is actually a friend instead of a villain. And the other one, vice versa, it's going to be perhaps the one that was supposed to be your friend or ally is actually the main villain. Maybe the adventure module featured this sort of peasant that was constantly helping you. Perhaps he was a farmer and he was selling you food for supplies and provisions, or perhaps he provided some other service. But because of the many different events throughout the adventure, or perhaps throughout the campaign, it turns out that that peasant was the mastermind all along. He's actually a demon that took the shape of the peasant. Or maybe there is this character that is supposed to be the main villain and he's killing a lot of apparently random people, like a sort of serial killer. So you think that has to be the villain. But it turns out that he is actually a hero killing the members of a religion that is opening a portal to hell. It could be like that. So do not feel too attached to the way that the plotline and the agendas, objectives, etc. are presented. Depending on the solo results, they are going to change drastically. But you could have your favorite villains and heroes. Maybe you don't want them to change at all. Maybe you are running an adventure in the Forgotten Realms, and sometimes Dritz Dourden appears, and you like Dritz as a hero. And so you keep him like that, you randomize everything else, but he's always going to be a hero. Maybe you are fighting Manchun or Saul Chambril or any of those villains, Sastam. Those are iconic villains of the realm. You wouldn't want them to be heroes, or at least in most cases you wouldn't. That would change things too much. I think it would take a bit away from the essence of those characters. So modify everything else except the nature of those, or the essence of those characters. So I hope these tips will help if you want to run a pre-generated module as a solo adventure, one pre-generated module that you are already familiar with. I'm going to put a link in the description to another playlist where I play a pre-generated module but that I didn't know anything about. It was the included adventure in the Quick and Classic role-playing game, one of the best fantasy role-playing games out there when it comes to a rules light experience. Perhaps the best when it comes to introducing people to RPGs. In that case, it's going to be very different because I didn't know anything about the scenario. I think it's easier to run things like that. But in this case where the module has been spoiled, you know, all of the plot twists, the surprises, definitely randomize everything as I have mentioned. Randomize the reactions, the actions, the social interaction with the non-player characters, what they are saying, what they are doing. Modify if it's an adventure site, cut it up, take different elements, the magical fountain, the corridor with 100 ghosts or whatever, the passage with the block of stone that falls down as a trap, or that room that contains a couple of orcs and a bugbear that are planning some sort of attack, or they're trying to steal something from a neighboring village. You can take all of that and randomize it, create your own random tables to come up with some surprising events within the adventure. I think in some cases, if you think that an adventure is very well crafted, like, oh, I don't want to ruin everything, I just read through the entire module and I like the plot lines and the interactions between the different factions, I like everything, the way that the traps are set up in the adventure site, then I would recommend that you use Abraham's method instead to emulate player characters and run the adventure as it is. Well, thank you for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions, or your own ideas on how to run pre-generated modules that have been spoiled, please let us know in the comments section. And once again, thank you. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.